Well, the next thing I like to look for as an attacker is seeing if I can do anything with sudo. So as a reminder, sudo lets you run commands as other users. If I say sudo-l, I can list all the things that I, as hacker, can do with sudo. Looking down here, we can see all the commands that I can run using sudo. This first all indicates that I can run the command as any user. The second all indicates that I can run the command as any group. And then this is the actual command that I can run. A lot of the times you'll see all, in which case that user will be able to run any command as any other user. So for example, they can prefix with sudo, run any command they want, and they'll automatically run it as root. However, in this case, we're a little more limited. We can only run the apt command using sudo or running it as root. So when we're limited in what command we can run this way, what I like to do is I like to go on a site called GTFOBins. You can either search it up online on Google and go to GTFOBins, or you can go to gtfobins.github.io. Either way, you'll be taken to this page. And in this page, you can see a bunch of different common files or common runnable binaries in Linux and different ways that you can abuse them if you have certain access. So in this case, you'll notice that we could use apt, right? And we could run it with sudo. So if I search for apt, you'll see under functions, I have sudo. So that indicates that there's a potential way of abusing our sudo privileges when running apt. And it seems that in this case, when we run apt with sudo, and we try to read the changelog, it uses the default pager, which is likely to be less, and then from there, we can actually switch to running a shell. So if I follow these commands here, use sudo apt changelog apt to read the changelog, and then I use this exclamation point to run a different shell. Let's see if we can switch to root. So sudo apt changelog apt, and then if I do exclamation point, and I'll just run bin bash, which is my preferred shell. Now it looks like we were able to switch from user hacker to user root. If I say who am I, you'll notice that I'm the root user. As defenders, how would we go about fixing this? Well, hacker should not have the option to run commands like apt as sudo or as root, right? In Linux, there are a few different places where sudo privileges are provided or defined, I guess. And this was already covered in a previous video in the NCE Cyber Sandbox tutorials, so I won't go into it too much, but you might remember that the etc sudoers file that I have to, of course, read with as a root. This is all the different commands that different users can run as root. So in this case, we see that root can run, obviously, any command, and we see that anybody who's in the sudo group can run all commands as any other user, right? In addition, there's this include dir. So within the sudoers file, we can also include other directories or other files. So I'm also going to have to check out the files in this included directory and see if maybe that gives somebody else more privileges. So if I cd to etc sudoers.d and I list out the files there, you'll notice a suspicious one called apt. And if I print out the contents of that apt file, of course I have to do this as root, you'll notice that here in this apt file, it's giving hacker the ability to run any command as any user, like we saw before. So if I wanted to change this, I could say sudo vsudo, and actually I have to specify the name of that file, so in this case it's apt. And now what I can do is I can remove this line, and then hacker would no longer be able to run the apt command with sudo, right? The problem with removing this is maybe it's actually necessary for scoring, or maybe it's necessary for a certain service that's running. And so I caution you against just plainly removing this file. Instead, I would suggest prefixing it with a hashtag, or in other words, commenting it out. If I comment this out, the line's still going to be there, and I can always uncomment it later if I see that something isn't working. But at the same time, hacker will no longer be able to run apt as with their sudo permissions, right, or as root. So if I save this file out and I exit, now I can test this out by switching to hacker. So if I say sudo su hacker, su hacker switches me to the user hacker. Sudo allows me to do that without entering hacker's password. Now let's see if I run sudo-l again, what things I can do with sudo. If I enter hacker's password here, this time it says, sorry, user hacker may not run sudo on Debian. So now we've officially gone ahead and we've fixed that vulnerability. So as an attacker, let's say I ran sudo-l. Oh my gosh, I cannot spell today. You'll notice that I can't run anything with sudo. What other options do I have?